We are winding down Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I want to talk about something that I don't think gets said enough. I was watching the recently released live action Masters of the Universe earlier this month. Yes, the He-Man movie, but stay with me. And near the beginning, there's a scene where a young Adam loses a sparring match with his father. He's on the ground, and Man-at-Arms, also known as Duncan, played by Idris Elba, looks at him and says, "When you fall, that is your chance to stand tall." And I couldn't stop thinking about that line because it's the complete opposite of what our culture tends to say about men right now. The conversation around men and strength has gotten so tangled up in what men shouldn't be that we've almost stopped talking about what they actually are and what they do when it counts, what they're capable of when everything is stripped away and there's nothing left but a choice. And that's what I want to talk about today. The science, the stories, and one movie that I think quietly got it right in 2026. So there's an assumption that runs through a lot of modern conversations about men, that strength is essentially a performance. When the pressure is high enough and the power is gone, what you find is fear and ego and cowardice. And I think that's wrong. And I think it's worth saying why and saying it clearly, because the way we talk about men has real consequences for how men see themselves. And I think it's important to talk about it this month. Yes, it's towards the end of the month. Sorry, but I got there. The assumption, I think, conflates two completely different types of people. The first is the authoritarian, the man whose identity is built entirely on dominance over others, who has no interior resources when the external power disappears. And that type is real, and that psychology collapses without the power structure underneath it. Like, we've all seen it. But yes, I'm going to say it's not all men, but it's not. It's not all men. In fact, it's not even most men. And treating it as representative as men as a whole is how you end up dismissing every man who has ever moved toward a threat instead of away from it. And there's another type entirely, and this is the one I think the research understands clearly, one history is full of, and the one Man-at-Arms was actually trying to build in young Adam in the Masters of the Universe movie. Not a dominator, but a protector, and those are not the same thing, despite what modern day society might want you to think. Now here's what the biology actually does when a man is backed into a corner with nothing left. The body doesn't dispense cowardice on a schedule. It triggers a hormonal cascade refined over hundreds of thousands of years for exactly this situation. Cortisol spikes, adrenaline floods in, and the brain narrows its focus to the immediate problem. That's not a system built for falling apart. That's a system built for action under pressure. Research out of the University of Texas shows that under extreme stress, high cortisol activity suppresses testosterone's role in dominant behavior, meaning men under genuine threat don't default to status seeking. The system recalibrates away from any type of dominance and towards something else entirely. And that something else is a protective instinct that is distinct, runs on a completely separate psychological fuel, and shows up consistently across cultures and across history. Research shows men instinctively position themselves between the people they care about and perceived threats, not as a performance, but because the impulse runs in the background, whether it ever gets called on or not. Research published in SciPost found that when evaluating potential partners, a man's willingness to protect, not his size, not his strength, but his willingness, was the primary driver in attraction, and it didn't evaporate when he failed to stop the threat. Men who stepped toward danger and were overpowered were still rated as desirable than men who stepped away. Now, we as women have been selecting for this across generations, not for dominance, for the willingness to move toward a threat when the people you love are in danger. Yale researchers who study heroic acts found that most people who perform them describe the same experience, saying that they didn't deliberate, they didn't calculate risk, they just acted. Saying, "I didn't think about it, I just did it." And I am going to show you what that looks like with some names attached. But first up, let's talk about Sully Sullenberger. On January 15th of 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 hits a flock of geese on takeoff out of LaGuardia. Both of the engines go out 4 minutes in, and you have no thrust on the plane, and the passenger list is full. Sully, as the pilot, glided the plane onto the Hudson River. All 155 people survived, and then after the plane was down and sinking, passengers evacuating onto the wings in the crisp January air, Sully walked the aisle twice to make sure nobody was left. He was the last person off, and he described the moment the engines went quiet as the worst feeling of his life. Terrified, he knew exactly what it meant, landed the plane anyway, and was still the last one off. Also, worth noting, he was a former Air Force Academy graduate and fighter pilot, so the military didn't instill that in him in those 4 minutes. It was already there. Next up, we have Pascual Torres. In 2024 in Fort Worth, Texas, Torres is at Gateway Park with his family when he sees 2 boys that he didn't know struggling in the Trinity River. He had no equipment and no training and no backup, but he jumped in anyway. He's able to get one of the children to shore and goes off for the second, and unfortunately doesn't come back up. His 3-year-old son sadly spent days asking when his dad was coming home. He made the selfless act without thinking to jump in to go and rescue these children. I'm gonna butcher some of these names here. Next up, we have Olajimi Olabunumi Adewale. In London of 2021, he was 20 years old on his way home from work past midnight, and he sees a woman fall off the London Bridge into the Thames. He calls the police, and then according to his friend standing right beside him, he jumps in after into the Thames in the dark looking for a stranger. Sadly, he didn't make it back out, and his friend said when talking about him that that's just how Jimmy was. He was pure of heart. Next up, we have Ricky Best, Taliesin Namkai-Meshi, and Micah Fletcher. In Portland, Oregon, in May of 2017, a man on a MAX commuter train is threatening 2 young women, one of them a teenager. These 3 men step between him and them. Ricky Best, who is 53 and an Army veteran, father of 4, Taliesin Namkai-Meshi, who is 23, just graduated college, and Micah Fletcher, who was a 21-year-old poet. The attacker pulls a knife, and they had already put themselves in the way within 2 seconds with no weapons and no plan. Ricky Best and Taliesin Namkai-Meshi died. Micah Fletcher was fortunate enough to survive. Taliesin's last words as bystanders tried to help him were, "Tell everyone on this train that I love them." And that takes us to Todd Beamer, Tom Burnett, Mark Bingham, and Jeremy Glick of United Airlines Flight 93. On September 11th of 2001, 45 minutes in, hijackers take the plane. 1 passenger is already dead, and these men start making phone calls, not panicking, but gathering information. Tom Burnett calls his wife 4 times, calmly asking what she knows about the other planes, and she tells him about the towers. He says, "I know we're all going to die. There's 3 of us who are going to do something about it." Jeremy Glick tells his wife the passengers voted to rush the cockpit, jokes about the butter knife from breakfast, says he loves her, and puts the phone down. Todd Beamer tells a GTE operator he and the others were going to jump the hijacker with the bomb. She asks if he's sure, and he says, "I'm going to have to go out on faith. I don't have much of a choice." At 9:57 a.m., the cockpit reporter picks up yelling, thumping, and dishes crashing. The plane went down near Shanksville at 10:03 a.m., 20 minutes from Washington, D.C. The Capitol or the White House or wherever they were planning to crash the plane that day didn't get hit because those men rushed a cockpit with their bare hands. Tom Burnett's last words to his wife were, "We're going to do something, I've got to go." He knew the math, and he did it anyway. We have Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cashe of the United States Army. In October of 2005 in Samarra, Iraq, Cashe's Bradley fighting vehicle hits an IED, fuel cells ignite, and soldiers are trapped inside the vehicle. Cashe gets out with his uniform soaked in fuel, and he decides to go back in. He pulls soldiers out one by one. His uniform catches fire, but he keeps going back in anyway. Then again and again and again, pulling 6 soldiers and an Iraqi interpreter out of his vehicle. His commander said again and again, soaked in fuel, on fire, with no regard for his own safety. When the medevacs arrived, Cashe refused to board until every one of his men was out first. 72% of his body had 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Sadly, he died 3 weeks later. It took 16 years and an act of Congress for him to receive the Medal of Honor posthumously, and he was the first Black recipient for action since Vietnam. His vehicle was burning, and the situation was unsurvivable, but he went back in even when he was already on fire. Sullenberger had no engines, Torres had nothing but the water and a decision. Jimmy had no reason anyone would hold against him for walking past. Best, Namkai-Meshi, and Fletcher had no weapons. Beamer, Burnett, Bingham, and Glick had supposedly butter knives, and 30 seconds, Cashe was on fire, and none of them had any type of power or any reason to puff themselves up or look dominant. Every single one moved toward a problem and wanted to protect and save those around them. And here's what's worth sitting with. None of this is surprising. If you've spent any real time around men, you already knew this pattern existed. You may have even watched someone rehearse it quietly, not in action, but in thought, which brings me to something that I think is more revealing than any research paper that I found while doing this. There's a meme that's been circulating for years. I'm sure you've seen it in passing, but it describes two things apparently men fantasize about. The first is holding a defensive position against impossible odds, buying time for the people they love to escape, like the last stand, going down so someone else gets out. And the second being held and told they don't have to be strong anymore. Now, both of these got treated as punchlines, but look at what this first one actually contains. This is not a power fantasy. The whole premise is that power is gone. The situation is unsurvivable. The man has already done the math and knows he isn't getting out, and what he's rehearsing in the quiet moments of maybe doing the dishes or sitting in traffic is what he does inside that constraint, where he faces, who he buys time for, how he uses the one thing that he has left to give the people he loves, which is a chance. That is a fantasy about purpose, not dominance or power. Men aren't fantasizing about being the most powerful person in the room. They're fantasizing about being the one to hold the line when things go wrong. No special abilities, no backup, no exit, just feet planted anyway. And that's not dominance, that's service. That's someone who's already quietly decided that the people around them matter more than their own survival. And yeah, someone might say it's just a silly fantasy, but we just went through the names. Torres didn't deliberate at the riverbank. Jimmy didn't negotiate with himself on the London Bridge. Ricky Best didn't imagine a heroic death. He stepped in front of a knife. And Tom Burnett said he knew he was going to die and went anyway, and Alwyn Cashe was already on fire. The fantasy and the behavior point in exactly the same direction, not toward cowardice, but in front of people to protect. So let's go back to that movie, to the cheesy Masters of the Universe. I mentioned the sparring scene at the top with young Adam on the ground and Duncan telling him that when you fall, that's your chance to stand tall, but that's not the only thing Duncan teaches him. At some point, Duncan sits with Adam and explains what strength actually means, what it means to be a man, if you will, and he tells him that when someone comes at your family with a sword, you need to be strong enough to protect them, not to glorify violence, not to go looking for it, but to be strong enough to protect those who are weaker than you and to know when to use that strength and when not to. That's it. That's the whole thing. And I sat there the whole time thinking it's going to be great when they screw this lovely message up by the end of the movie, but they didn't. Strength exists in service of protection, and it has a purpose beyond itself, and the wisdom isn't just in having it, it's in knowing when and where it's called for. It's not a story about a problem of strength. It's a story about what happens when strength is passed down and utilized properly, and what it looks like when a man has to utilize it and understand what it is. Duncan also tells Adam that the poets aren't on the front lines, not as a dismissal of empathy or diplomacy, but as an honest acknowledgement that there are people in this world whom none of that works, and pretending otherwise leaves the defenseless with no one between them and what's coming. And without spoiling the ending, Adam does try diplomacy first. He gives the choice, he extends the hand, and when that fails, when the baddie closes that door, Adam does what must be done in the most cheesy, awesome He-Man way possible. Not with rage, but with the weight of someone who already tried everything else and knew this was his time to protect those he was in front of. And that's what strength looks like when it's oriented correctly, not toward domination, towards protection, knowing when to use it and when not to, and being willing to act when the moment demands it. That's He-Man at his core, the most powerful man in the universe, and the entire point is what he does with it. He doesn't rule, he doesn't dominate, he absorbs the hit so everyone else has a chance. And that's what every man I spoke about earlier did, and Duncan knew it when Adam was still a boy on the ground at the beginning of the movie. It's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I do want to say something directly. I think the way we talk about men matters. The stories we tell about what men are underneath when the pressure is highest and the power is gone, those stories shape how men see themselves. And if the story we keep telling is that strength is a performance and cowardice is what's really there, we are doing damage quietly and consistently and in ways that are really hard to undo. When the evidence says something completely different, the biology says something completely different, the names I've read you today say something completely different, most men backed into a corner with nothing left aren't going to fall apart. They're going to look around, see who else is in the room, and then decide who needs to get out, even if it's not them, and then they move. That has always been true, and it's true right now. And this month especially, I think it deserves to be said out loud. And I mean, I know men who are like this. I married one, and at the risk of being called a pick me, I think they deserve better than what we've been saying about them. Anyway, if you liked this video, go ahead and leave it a like and let me know in the comments, who would you put on that list of people, of men who deserve to have their stories told. And to the men in your life, go ahead and give them a great big hug. Hold them for a moment and just let them know that for just right now, you don't have to be strong, and give them a safe place. Did you see the Masters of the Universe movie? Did you kind of have the same takeaway that I did? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And that's all I've got for you today. And if you're new here at the Olive Badger channel, we cover AI, technology, corporate accountability, and a little bit of gaming. If that's your thing, I'd love to have you here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. However, if you don't subscribe, I might be forced to banish you to the Shadow Realm.
No, much better.
You can live there forever with Skeletor. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and peace out. Bye.